Hey everybody, my name is Lance Howe and I will be going over my presentation with you for the Family and Human Development Capstone course. The topic I chose to go over is retention issues in state child welfare agencies. So, kind of jumping in here, there's a current trend right now which is pretty blatantly obvious that there's an extremely high turnover rate for state employees that specifically are working in child welfare. It's definitely not a secret or a surprise that it's like that. And it's a topic of interest that the state agencies are interested in, and it's something that they try to handle and they try to tackle it, to improve these turnover rates. But consistently in the last few years, it's something that has just only increased and gotten bigger. And there's a lot of things that factor into retention and burnout and turnover rate, and it's just kind of a matter of figuring out what the leading causes are, how it can be alleviated, and there's a lot of different nuance to the discussion. There's a lot of ways you can tackle it. So at this point in time, I would like to ask you what you think are some ways that burnout is happening, that turnover rates are happening, and what do you think are some of the leading causes for that? So I'll give you a little bit of time to think about that, and then we'll move on. So hopefully you had enough time to think of at least one or two, but a lot of the big reasons for quitting I've laid out here on the PowerPoint: salary, high workloads, emotional distress, lack of training, and unrealistic expectations. Salary is something that is always in the conversation. And when you ask an employee what was one of the contributing factors of you leaving your agency or to go somewhere else, salary was always discussed. It was always something that they felt could have used some improvement. That being said, salary was not the leading reason for turnover and employees quitting jobs. It was a little bit contrary to what I was expecting to find, because I know that in my experiences with the Department of Child Safety here in Arizona, a lot of my colleagues and myself chose to leave, and salary was a huge aspect of that. But according to the research and what I discovered doing that is that salary was very influential and it was very prevalent, but it was not the leading reason for employees to quit. So moving next to high workloads, this one, through the research, is what is thought to be the leading cause for turnover and burnout. And the workloads are high. I know here in Arizona, at the time when I had left the department, I had 55 children that I was managing, and I was working based off of a policy that said I should have 27 at the most. So that's creating an extremely high workload. And then when you factor in employees leaving and quitting, not only are you having to reallocate that work to your other workers, and all it's doing is bumping up their already high workload. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, and it's really created a really big problem. So moving on to emotional distress, that's another large factor, a big indicator for burnout and turnover. It's pretty straightforward, pretty transparent topic. You have people going into homes where drugs are being manufactured, drugs are being used, homes that have been hoarded or are filthy, and ultimately you're working and interviewing kids who have gone through physical abuse, have gone through sexual abuse. And when you interview them, they go into detail of what their life is day in and day out. And no matter how thick of skin you have, no matter how many years of veteran you are, that emotional distress eventually will weigh you down. So that's a huge motivational factor for people leaving is just they can't handle it anymore. And that's nothing against them. I would challenge anybody to get into this field and be able to um, handle it and for a long time. So that goes into the next topic, which is lack of training. And this is a tricky one because there's a few different aspects to it. So more often than not, you're being trained in a classroom for this job, for this position. And the classroom is beneficial. There's no doubt about that. You are getting good information. However, it doesn't translate real well going into the field, and that's what a lot of people in these studies and through my experience have had issues with. You know, you have your training, and then when you start and you get out in the field and you start working the job, you have all of these different forms that you need to fill out and all of these meetings to attend, and you have to go to court. And when you're getting trained in the classroom, you're not being taught proper ways to write a court report or when and how certain referrals are used or how to create those referrals. So that lack of training is huge, and that makes people leave. If they don't feel confident doing their position, they're not going to hang around. Um, and at the end of the day, that kind of works into supervisional support, and a lot of people leave due to saying or feeling that they do not have support from their supervisors or anyone else. So it's kind of a grouping of things that is involved with lack of training. And then ultimately, and then the last one is unrealistic expectations. So, like I had said earlier, we were here in Arizona having caseloads of 55 children for a policy saying 27 children. So we were being held to the same standards of only having 27 children for 55. So that's seeing every kid every month. 55 kids, 20 business days. That's pretty tough. So those expectations really make it hard for workers to keep up. And not only that, they're going through punitive actions if they don't maintain the kind of work that administration feels like they need to. So that is kind of rounds out the big factors of people leaving. And the next topic is what are some of the consequences for such high burnout and such high turnover rates. So I'll give you a little bit to think of some of those, and we'll move on in a couple seconds. So consequences. Right here, employee turnover has serious implications for the quality of service provided to clients. That's pretty straightforward. Children are experiencing these adverse experiences, and because of this high turnover, cases get shuffled along, cases fall through the cracks, and ultimately, if kids are experiencing these things because of these cases getting shuffled around, it takes the new worker a while to respond or to find the time to get out and do it, therefore causing the shortcomings for the services we provide to them. It's a really kind of a slippery slope and a dangerous thing, because if these cases get transferred over to someone new and it takes them a week, 2 weeks to get into the pile of work that they got from someone who quit, that's going to lead to children going through more adverse experiences, and unfortunately that also leads to potential increases in childhood mortality due to these experiences. So that's a big issue, and that's something that needs to get taken care of. And another thing is Williams, Nichols, Kirk, and Wilson discussed in their study that employee turnover is high, and that limits the amount of well-trained and experienced employees. So because of this turnover rate, your veterans are leaving, and all of your experience is going out the door. So that leaves you with relatively new people who probably know their job, but not to the extent of these veterans. And what's happening is all of these cases that the veterans had get transferred to the new people, and then those new people try to balance the workload they already had with this new influx of cases. And it's just a vicious cycle, and it makes it really hard to keep up. So those are some of the consequences. Next is the current solution that these state agencies are using to solve the problem of turnover is with large scale pushes in hiring. And it's got some pros and cons, but I want you to think about what are some of the implications of a large push in hiring, and what are some of the benefits if you feel that there is any. And then most importantly is this something that is going to continue to damage an organization who is already struggling? So think about some of those things real fast, and then we'll move on and we'll discuss what some popular solutions or useful solutions are or can be. So moving on, issues with hiring surges. I personally, I think that doing these massive job fairs kind of does more damage than good. And right here it says state that it's important that the workers who are being hired have a desire to work in child welfare, and furthermore, they have to have a high level of agreement with the work that's being done by the agency. So that kind of tackles a lot of issues right then and there. You're looking at maybe hiring, you're ended up hiring people who this isn't their first choice of employment. They might not have a passion for this field. They might just be using it as a resume builder. Those are things that could come with these hiring surges. And if you have workers who maybe don't have a degree or weren't intending to go into child welfare, they might not be able to give their all if they're not totally invested. And then furthermore, you can be someone who was intending to be in this field, and once you start working with the state agency, maybe your ideals aren't the same. Maybe you have issues with how they work, with how they function, and that could create a lot of turmoil too. These people that are going to these job fairs, they're probably potentially looking for a paycheck, and that's it. And that creates a lot of issues because, well, if you're not there for the kids, what's going to happen, to them? Are you not going to work as hard? Or you got to have a passion, and and it's more than, this is a career that requires commitment. I mean, yes, it does build a resume, it can look good, but ultimately, um, you know you have to invest time into it. And if you do want to move vertically within the state, you have to commit 2 to 3 years of your time. So those are some of the issues with hiring surges. So next, moving forward, we will be looking at some solutions for retention, and things that can be maybe done to help with that burnout rate. So take a little bit of time to think about what you think could be some worthwhile solutions, and then we'll move forward. All right, so moving on, it's really important to have good solutions. And a lot of the big things, that can kind of be clumped together with what we looked at earlier, which is reasons for leaving, is a greater focus on your veteran employees. I think that's an extremely important thing to worry about. Those are the people who know what they're doing. They've been doing it a long time, and we got to retain those people. You have to look at your plasticity with policy. You have to be willing to adjust expectations, because if you're holding workers accountable for unrealistic expectations, you're kind of setting them up to fail. So you really have to be able, these agencies need to be prepared at least to alter policy a little bit. And then finally, salary and incentives, a pretty clear cut, option there. Yamatani et al. They discussed that issues with caseload demonstrate a need for more funding in order to increase retention. So that's pretty straightforward. If you provide more funding, you're going to either have more workers or more competent workers, or at least workers that are willing to work hard, and they'll stick around. And then also there nationally, better salaries are noted as being a factor of retention. This is about as straightforward as it comes. If you provide your employees with better salaries or something like that, they're going to stick around. And here in the state of Arizona, after you reach your first year of employment, they give you a bonus, and then after you reach and go into your third year of employment, you get another bonus. And then at that point, unless you become a supervisor or something like that, you get no more incentives at all. And that's a tough thing, because then you get to a potential rut where if you're working there beyond 2 years, well, how do I know that they're invested in me? So a few of these things, you can come up with the retention and incentive based program. So after you do the standard up salary increases, maybe you do a performance based increase where every year or every 6 months your performance gets evaluated, and maybe you can get small stipends or something like that. And it's noted that the sooner that these interventions take place, or these incentive programs, the higher the likelihood that retention in employees will increase. So not only do you need to implement that with your veterans, but when you have new people coming in, you need to make sure that those programs are in place for them so they can keep getting validated and keep being rewarded, so they'll stay around. Policy, moving on. Policy needs to accurately match what the caseloads are. If you have a policy for not that many kids, and you have a state agency that's managing double than that, you got to be willing to move your policy around a little bit. And it's understood policy is not an easy thing to change necessarily, and it requires a lot of moving parts, amending things and such. But higher up management, administration, they need to recognize that there's just too much work to be done, and either not enough workers or not enough time to do it. So time frames need to be expanded. We got to be able to give these workers time to have quality work and not just quantity. Again, Yamatani et al. They found that due to the workloads being well above best practice, employees are being pressured to move cases fast, and that kind of goes into that punitive thing. If you're being forced to push these cases out, you're not going to be putting out quality. And at the end of the day, you might be failing a child because you're being rushed by management or someone who's not in the field to know what it's like. And if we can alter that policy a little bit, then we might give them just enough breathing room to get their jobs done, in a more appropriate manner. And that's what's really important. And then moving on, some additional solutions here. And these can kind of be a huge indicator on what can be done. Questionnaires to your employees. Get their input. See what their solutions are. When you have administration who hasn't been in the field for a while, they kind of lose sight of what some of the tough things are, or what some of the challenges are in the field. And this is where a lot of times that veteran perspective can come out and really be influential. And not only that, if you ask for an employee's input and solutions, if you give them these questionnaires, they're going to feel like their opinion matters. Whether if anything comes from it or not, they're going to be able to say, oh, well, they are asking for my input, so maybe they do care to an extent. And at the end of the day, if these management teams can look at this, they're going to know what some good solutions are. Um, they're going to hear what people in the field need. And at the end of the day, that's what is going to make the most change. That's what's going to improve things if you listen to the people dealing with it on the front lines. Um, so I think that could be a pretty useful thing that could be implemented. So to conclude, um, a few things. You got to focus on your veterans. You got to keep the people who know what they're doing in the job. And that's, providing incentives to them past what is standard. If they're performing, give them a stipend here or there, something like that. But you got to put the focus on them. You have to make sure that the caseloads are reasonable, which takes us down into the change in policies and things like that. You got to make sure these people are having the time to get their job done. If they don't have time to get their job done, they're going to burn out. They're going to feel like they can't get on top. And that's when you start getting these veterans leaving. That's when you start getting new people leaving. So those are two really important things. And, that kind of goes into the increase in salary. Yeah, it's kind of a hard thing to do. It's a state agency. It involves a budget. But I think if you can work towards getting salaries increased, you'll see retention. It might not be the leading factor of people leaving, but it's crucial enough that it can help people stay. And then better training. I know it's something we haven't discussed tons in, but you got to get people more ready for the field. If you can't get them ready for the field, they're not going to be as successful. And if that's doing something where I know here in Arizona, 5 years ago or so, part of training was you would get an actual case and work it from the beginning, you know, and that was one way they learned how to do referrals and things like that. Why they changed that training style, I don't know, but they did. And that goes into support from supervisors and things like that. If you don't have support from management, you're gonna feel like no one's got your back. You're gonna want to bounce out of there. You're not gonna want to stay. So those are a lot of the big conclusions. Here are my references. Feel free to look at any of them. Some pretty interesting stuff, really, in them, and there's all kinds of good info there. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't a total bore, and maybe something came of it, some insight on what it's like to be out there in the field if you haven't been a case manager. And if you have any further questions for me or anything, just let me know. Thank you. Have a good day.